The laughter of the giant shattered the silence and made the earth tremble. For 40 days, his voice echoed like a curse, corroding the courage of an entire army. Men who had once faced wild beasts now wept inside their tents. The king, who once commanded thousands, trembled, unable to lift his sword. The valley had become a stage of shame, where Israel saw no way out, only defeat. Yet, when all seemed consumed by fear, an unknown boy appeared, bringing nothing but bread, and scars etched in blood upon distant fields. And in that very instant, destiny was torn in two. For in the face of darkness, the story that the Valley of Redemption would never forget had begun to rise. He appeared on the horizon like a living monument, an impossible shadow that made the sun burn fiercer upon his bronze scales. Each step of Goliath shook the ground as if the valley itself were breathing fear. The metal of his armor blazed in the light, casting blinding flashes as though fire had been kindled upon his skin. His voice was worse than his stature. When he spoke, it was as if stones split apart within the chests of those who listened. His words were not mere insults. They were blades that tore through courage, piercing deep into the soul of Israel. 40 days, 40 dawns of humiliation. On the first day, warriors clenched their teeth and steadied their swords. By the 10th, they retched before the lines of battle, their bodies trembling as if the war had already been lost. By the 20th, men wept in silence inside their tents, their beards soaked with tears and shame. By the 30th, deserters were dragged back, forced to endure the laughter that seemed to have no end. And when the 40th day arrived, the most dreadful sound spread across the valley, the laughter of the giant. It was not mere mockery. It was a sound that reduced men to dust, that drove dogs to flee, and horses to rebel against their own masters. At the center of it all stood the King of Israel, the tallest man in the nation, the one who had once commanded thousands, trembling like a child. His hands could barely hold the cup of wine. His sword lay upon the ground, forgotten, as though already defeated. And so the whole valley bent beneath fear, while the giant strode as if he were master of the land. While the valley was consumed by fear, far away an anonymous boy tended flocks upon the hills of Bethlehem. His body bore scars few would believe, marks left by the teeth of wolves, the slashes of a bear's claws, blood mingled with his own to save fragile creatures that scarcely knew he existed. The field was his school. There he learned patience to keep watch in silence, precision when a single stone marked the line between life and death, courage to run against predators greater than himself. Each sheep saved cost, sweat, pain, and at times his own torn flesh. Yet the boy never retreated. It was in that obscurity that destiny found him. His father did not summon him to war, only to a mundane task, to carry bread and cheese to his brothers. Nothing more. A message, a servant's errand. But when his feet touched the valley of battle, the air was heavy with fear. The silence was broken only by the laughter of the giant, and his brothers, instead of welcoming him, scorned him. "Go back to the sheep. This is no place for you." Yet in that moment, the unknown boy saw what no man could see, not an invincible enemy, but merely another predator. And he already knew how to hunt them. Saul's tent reeked of fear. Spilt wine soaked into the ground, mingling with the sweat of his counselors. Maps scattered as though they might redraw the courage that had been lost. It was there the boy entered, dust clinging to his clothes, his staff worn from use, his hands calloused by shepherd's toil. The men laughed. A boy among warriors was like a lamb cast before wolves. Guards mocked, counselors turned their gaze away, certain it was nothing more than another humiliation among many. But the boy did not retreat. In silence, he raised his arm. Scars etched across his skin stood as witnesses burned in iron. On his arm, the marks of a lion's fangs. On his flank, the tear of a bear that had nearly ripped open his ribs. Each wound was proof he had already run towards death and prevailed. "Goliath is but another predator," he said firmly. The words fell heavy in the air. They did not sound like bravado, but like judgment. Even the king, who had hidden behind his stature, faltered at the certainty of one who had bled to protect the fragile. Saul tried to clothe him in his own armor. The helmet weighed upon his skull like stone. The breastplate crushed his shoulders. The sword dragged as though it bore the weight of a tomb. The boy staggered, fell to his knees, gasping as if drowning. It was a grotesque sight. A child sunk in iron, suffocated by a burden that was never his. The king's armor, meant to be an honor, had become a prison. David stripped away each piece, one by one, until once more he stood with scarred skin, staff in hand, and the leather sling hanging at his side. He looked at Saul and at the men who mocked. His voice now was no longer that of a boy, but of one who had already chosen to die if need be. "With stones I slew lions. With stones I shall slay giants." And before the king, before the men who had trembled for 40 days, the improbable took the place none dared to claim. Not with iron, not with crown, but with scars, faith, and the silent fury of one who knew the valley held his destiny. The entire valley froze. 40,000 men drew back, their steps dragged by shame, eyes fixed upon the ground, swords buried like tombstones. Not one of them dared to advance. But a boy, without armor, without sword, ran against the shadow that had terrified a nation. Goliath roared with laughter. His voice thundered as if the heavens were being torn apart, spitting insults and curses. The bronze upon his body blazed as though the sun itself had descended to wage war. Each word was a sentence of death. And yet, before them all, the giant faltered. His feet, heavy as pillars, slid one step backwards. The boy's gaze had struck him before the stone was even loosed. The sling slid from his waist as an extension of his own hand. Worn leather, darkened by sweat and blood, spun in circles that whistled through the air. The sound began low, a whisper. Then it swelled, becoming the cry of wind tearing through the silence of the valley. The Philistines fell mute. Israel forgot to breathe. Even the beasts drew back, as though sensing that something impossible was about to unfold. The boy did not aim for the guarded chest, nor the throat shrouded in iron. His eyes locked upon the one exposed place, a strip of flesh between helm and eyes. 3 fingers of frailty in a body 9 feet of bronze and muscle. The sling whirled faster, the whistle sharpened to a shriek like the wail of steel about to shatter. Then the arm stretched out. The body turned. The stone flew. For a moment, suspended in the air, it was nothing more than a fragment of river, a single heartbeat that stretched into eternity. And in that heartbeat, 2 entire armies saw destiny change. The impact was brutal. The sound was not of stone against metal, but of rotten timber breaking, of bones giving way. The giant's brow split, his skull cracked. Blood burst from his eyes, his mouth, his ears. Goliath remained standing, his eyes rolling white, his body still fighting to deny death. But the fall was inevitable, and when the colossus collapsed, the ground shook. The valley quaked, as if the very earth had waited 40 days just to feel that impact. The giant was dead. And for the first time, the silence that reigned in Israel was not of fear, but of awe. The body of Goliath lay motionless, yet the valley still quaked beneath the weight of his fall. The dust had not yet settled when the boy ran forward. There was no victory, no celebration, only unfinished work. The giant's sword lay beside him, buried in the earth as though the ground itself had tried to hold it down. Its hilt was as thick as a man's arm, its weight greater than any weapon in Israel. David needed both hands, both feet pressed firm into the soil, every muscle straining to the limit. Slowly the blade rose, scraping the sky, glinting with light and blood. The first stroke tore into flesh, but caught upon bone. The second ripped the windpipe, spraying hot blood in streams, spattering across the boy's face. The third, with cry and fury, severed the head from the body. It rolled into the dust, heavy, eyes still open, mouth twisted in silence. Blood gushed from the neck like a river, drenching the boy's hands and feet. David grasped the coarse hair and lifted the blood-soaked head high. The valley froze. 2 armies, 80,000 eyes, watched as a boy raised the impossible trophy of war. The Philistines broke first. Panic screamed across their ranks like fire. Weapons dropped upon the ground, warriors fleeing without a backward glance, cries of despair echoing through the hills. The terror that had once crushed Israel now burned within its enemies. Israel awoke. Swords long buried in the dust were torn free. Shields rose once more. The silence of 40 days became a roar. The army that had trembled now charged, no longer fleeing, but pursuing. And the valley, once a stage of shame, became the cradle of vengeance. In that valley, a boy ceased to exist. What rose, drenched in blows, was no longer the son of Jesse, nor merely a shepherd. It was a warrior whom kingdoms would fear, a name destined to cross centuries like both shadow and sword. Goliath had fallen, but he was not the first giant, nor would he be the last. Long before, when angels abandoned heaven and joined themselves to the daughters of men, the Nephilim were born, monsters that made the earth tremble and forced God to judge the world with waters deep. It was Enoch who witnessed that terror and left records that still echo as a warning. The fall of Goliath was but a prelude, for the true darkness did not end in the valley. It moves silently through history, awaiting its unveiling in the valley of redemption.